I mean, first, and this is an obvious argument, and you stressed it, but I think it's still the most important one. Growth is rather weak in Europe. Growth is majorly happening outside Europe. So there's a lot of homework we will have to do, and I think we have a good chance to do it with the new institutions, which is about doing the right structural reforms and also generating more investment. So this is very important, but this is not what we are talking about today. What we also need to do, of course, is to open up new markets for the European business and for the European economy. And there, even so there is diverging views on the size of the positive impacts, it is very clear, and there's all studies, everybody is suggesting that TTIP will have a positive effect on jobs and growth. And I think this is the most important thing we should keep in mind. And of course, I am happy to have all these debates on whether the size is underestimated or whatsoever. But I think it is very clear that this is the best possibility we've got to scale up growth and jobs. And all relevant studies suggest this. Number two, looking at the debate, and we already had part of it, and there will be aspects we will discuss later on. But I think many of the arguments against TTIP, if you look at it very closely, are more or less a general critique towards globalization. And looking at this, I mean, I think we should be very clear that globalization is happening and will continue to happen. And again, I think TTIP, in the sense of sharing forces transatlantically, is an excellent opportunity to shape globalization according to our values. And I'm not afraid to say Western values, because there's nothing bad about Western values. On the contrary, and we've seen that history is not over, and there's different concepts in the world, and I think we have a much better chance to have our model, how we see things, prevail if we share forces. And looking at Europe and the US, at the transatlantic marketplace from a global perspective, there's much more which unites us than what separates us. What separates us, we are about to discuss it, and we have to discuss it. And the third point I wanted to make, certainly TTIP will be positive for all sizes of companies and businesses, and as a consequence also for employees and consumers, as we see it. Will there be only winners and no losers? No. Will the ratio be better than normally? The answer is a clear yes. And I think I've never seen an agreement, an FTA agreement or FTA and investment agreement like we have it here, where our constituency, our members were so united standing behind us, because normally you would have those who are more pushy and those who have more defensive interest. In this case, all our constituencies, all companies, all sectors are very much standing behind this agreement, very much standing behind the approach to reach this agreement, and I think this is a very clear sign that here is a lot to gain. But having talked about all sizes of companies, I think we have to be very clear that those who have most to gain is the SMEs, because there's a lot of things which are in TTIP which could be extremely positive for small and medium-sized companies. Number one, there is still tariff peaks with a specific SME relevance. This goes for textiles, this goes for processed foods. But much more than this, there is a lot of things where the cost of compliance, the cost of entry to these transatlantic marketplaces are higher for SMEs than they are for other companies. This goes for technical specifications, this goes for procedures, this goes for licensing measures, and so on and so on. And this is where we also need to harvest the benefit. Because being Austrian, being an Austrian national, I think I know very well that at the end what makes your economy really successful is competitive medium-sized companies with the possibility to see the world as their marketplace. Very often companies nobody knows, but this is what makes the difference at the end of the day. And this is why I also think we will need successful SMEs in the world, and there the transatlantic marketplace is a very logic next step. And this can be used as a training field, as a springboard to make medium-sized companies ready for global markets. So to sum it up, and what have you said about why things are going to the sand or not? I think first it's much too early to tell because I mean we are about a year of negotiations now, and I think no consistent agreement has ever been negotiated below 2 years and a half. So I think next year will be a decisive year. And second, we cannot allow for this to go to the sands, for the reasons I have stressed, but there's much more reasons to this. We need to make it a success. We need to aim for an ambitious agreement, and we can absolutely not allow to waste this opportunity. Thank you, Stephen, at this point.
Thank you, Markus. So more winners than losers, you said, but you seem to be suggesting among companies. Are you saying more winners than losers among societies in Europe?
No, overall I think it will have a positive effect for all groups. But when I was talking about more winners than ever, I was of course first of all talking about my constituency. And as I say, normally you have different sectors, different groups saying, okay, we are more in favor and others have a more defensive approach. This time, this is very unified, and I think this is a very clear sign that this time there's much more to gain than there would be in many other agreements we could consider.
I'm going to call on now Karl Martin Welker, who's Vice President of the German Engineering Association, called VDMA. And actually, there's some 3,100 enterprises in that association. I think the medium enterprise is pretty small. And one's heard a lot of criticism of TTIP as being sort of a deal for big business. It'd be kind of interesting to hear why it might be positive for small businesses, in your view.
Yeah, thank you very much, and good evening. I'm probably the only one not very familiar with the European processes here in Brussels. But I think I can help a little bit to calm the concerns of Mrs. Nguyen and Mrs. Ségol regarding what does that agreement bring to us. Let me first introduce my my main profession. I'm an entrepreneur of a mid-sized German machine tool builder. We employ almost 600 people in Cologne and worldwide about 750, having a big foot in the American market. And we are probably the typical example of the German Mittelstand, which is now kind of in the main focus of all European nations as being successful. We have a strong export. More than 50% of my products go abroad. And as I said, America is our most important export market outside of Europe. Aside of that, I'm representing the VDMA, the German Engineering or the Machine Tool Association, with about 3,100 companies, 1 million employees, 206 billion euro turnover. Of the companies in that association, 86% are small and medium-sized business, and they still, even being small, they have a 76% export rate, with about 56% of this export rate being outside of the EU. Why does this agreement, or why does America matter to us? It is the second most important market for our sector, with 14 billion euro. And it is a big company, a big country where we have invested a lot of money. Right now, we count about 7.6 billion being invested from our companies in the US. What is a problem I have, pretty much all our companies have? Yes, the tariff of 4%, but I would agree that is not the main issue. The main issue is the non-tariff barriers, and this is regarding the technical regulations we have there, and it is regarding the certification systems we have there. I'll give you an example. We are on my machines, probably 80%, 85% of all spark plugs in the world are done on my machines. Not so in America. Why not? Because the regulations there are so tough and so difficult, it's actually file after file after file, that we gave up to study all of that because it became so expensive that we said we rather drop the American market on that thing. So we deliver to Japan, to Korea, to Germany, to Italy, to wherever you want to, but we don't to the US because it's just too expensive to follow all their regulations. And I can give you many, many of these examples, and they ramp up between 5% and 20%, depending on what of our members we are asking, what are the hurdles to overcome to be successful in America. The hurdle is not the tariffs. The hurdle is the non-tariff barriers. And yes, we have to work on that. And if we would accept that a grounding cable in the European Union, CE norm, is green and yellow, and yes, it is red in the US. I don't know why it has to be red, but it is red. If we could live with that, it would help us tremendously. Does it make the product better or worse? No, it doesn't. It doesn't change anything. It's the same thing with the car lights or whatever, the blinker you have on the car. So this is, if we could, and this is my answer to the labor market, if we could overcome these hurdles, yes, I would hire more people. I could employ more people. And yes, I'm paying very high salaries. We are in the IG Metall organized, and we have nobody on the low-level income rate, and we have nobody on minimum wage. We have very high-paid employees, and we would love to deliver our machines to the US. So this is what we have to look at, and I think it's not only us profiting from that by having more employment in Germany in this case, it's also the US, because then finally their cars would last longer because they would have our spark plugs, and that makes it much easier to run. So this is we have to work on the...
That's good for the US consumers.
Right. That is a profit for the consumers. Here we are. So ISO standards we would like to harmonize them, but if we just would be able to tolerate that both sides have reasonable standards and we just accept and tolerate these standards, it would help us a lot. And the same thing, I could go on, I don't want to stress my time here, with testing laboratories. We also do 50% of all prostheses, knees, hips, whatever, are done on my machines. You don't want to go through the process of the FDA. It's awful. I mean, it's awful. I can deliver easily here in Europe, and nobody dies from my prostheses. If you go to the US, it takes you a year and a half to just be classified to be able to deliver in the health system there. So these are the reasons which I think give, for the companies, and especially, as Mr. Beyrer said, for the medium and small size, because the big companies, they can afford to have this enormous lawyer stuff and consultants and whatever who go through all these papers and work that out. I can't. I have to give up. If they don't help me, if you don't come up with an agreement with Korea, also with the US, then this market is dead for me. That's how simple it is. And why is TTIP strategically important? I think generally world trade negotiations to liberalize global trade are stuck due to different reasons, and I don't want to go all into that. And I think TTIP gives a good possibility to stimulate global liberalization, and I think the growth lays outside of Europe. And if we see that and we want to grow here, we have to grow with export, and to get that export, we have to find agreements with the countries we want to deliver our goods to. So I see big opportunities there, and I think if we do this agreement now with the Americans, it can also set an example, a good example, a role model for future agreements, and especially here, where we have let's say, friends on our other sides who share the same common ground in thinking like we do, if we can make the right role model there, it can be copied all over the world, and it would help us tremendously. If the role model becomes the agreement with Korea, we also find the nicks and dips in it, and we don't want to see that. With America, we have the real chance to make A, it's two huge markets, and B, it has a potential to really, as we start from common ground, it has the potential to really become the role model. That's our point. That's not only mine as an entrepreneur, but also the one from my association. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. There's one, you didn't mention the dispute settlement issue. Is that a deal, important for you, or is it something that, that you don't really care about?
Actually, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not deep in it, but if you ask me, if we can't find an agreement on that with a country sharing the same juridical codes than we do, where should we ever find it?
This is about trade. This is about regulatory convergence if we can achieve it. And this is also about investment. And in order to generate investment, you need to protect investment. So the answer, do we need it? The answer is a clear yes. And I think the approach is too simplistic to say, let's forget about ISDS, then we have a deal. I think the question should be, let's try to do a better ISDS, because nobody says that what we are having at the time being, and by the way, which will continue to exist. We have it in 1,400 agreements, we have it in an energy charter, we have it in a number of things, and it will continue to exist, and nobody says it's perfect. There is improvements to be done in transparency. There's improvements to be done in the rules of procedure for the arbitration and so on and so on. So I think the chance we have here is to make a blueprint for a better ISDS, which would then be very beneficial for the world. But can we simply drop it? No. Because it sounds good to say, okay, now here we have two blocks with a developed legal system, we don't need it. Sounds good, but it's wrong. In the US, the governments are not obliged to apply the procedures and to apply the principle of non-discrimination. And this is precisely, Bernadette, you stressed, this is a positive discrimination against local companies, which is not true, because local companies don't need it, because the instrument is done to get a compensation for companies which are systematically discriminated towards local companies, and this is the truth. And therefore, I would say let's work on a better ISDS. And this brings me to the Canada thing. We all don't know precisely what is in it, beside the leaks, but I followed very closely. The Max Planck Institute made a clear assessment of the professor for international law, a clear assessment of the ISDS in CETA for the German Ministry of Economic Affairs, and comes to a very clear conclusion. That first, there's no real problem in it, and second, this is only when you shake your head, but this is the truth. This is only a possibility of last resort. First, there's a number of exemptions, carve-outs. Second, this is only after you have exhausted all possibilities in the national tribunals, and third, this is only when you have systematically discriminated a foreign investor, and therefore, I would say. Is it about hindering governments from doing what they want to do with their political will after having the mandate from the people who elected them? The answer is a clear no. But are governments to be held responsible for mistakes they make and breaches of international law if they do it in a discriminatory way? The answer is a clear yes. Because otherwise you will not generate investment because you cannot protect it.
I would like to make two statements. I was asked, what is your position to it? I myself don't have one, but if I listen to my companies, they tell me this thing was invented to protect us, not to hurt us. And the way is it only, again, if we want to put a role model, if we really want to put a platform out there which is good for all agreements, then I think it should be in.
The point is, if a local government is not obliged to apply the system of non-discrimination, it cannot protect you against discrimination. In many cases, they also come to the conclusion that they are not. Can we
move on? I think everybody's made a lot of points, and I would like to bring in the audience. And if you've got a yellow card, I should probably recognize people, but it's a bit hard to see here. So if I don't, I'll call on you. Are you a journalist? Yeah. Would you identify yourself and
it's another positive
Lene Vandalimekour for EU Trade Insights. As a trade journalist, I go to a lot of these events on TTIP. ISDS always comes out, and it's always the same arguments, whether you're in favor of it or against it. Do you see this debate changing at any time? And do you actually listen to the other side in this debate?
I think very much so, and I very closely listen to what Bernadette has said and what Monique has said, and I was very clearly also listening to the fact it's not a no, it's a yes if, because I think we all know it's good for employees at the end of the day and it's good for consumers under certain conditions. I would agree. But looking to the things we have been discussing, I mean, public services. Well, I think we are not pushing for privatizing public services. And this is not what is the negotiations for the time being. On the jobs, I think we had very good examples from Mr. Welker, who really brought you a good example of quality jobs which can be created. On the precautionary principle, I mean, I think this is a debate we have to have in Europe. I think nobody questions the precautionary principle. But we will have to overcome the perversion of the precautionary principle, because as we see it, and this has nothing to do with TTIP, as we see it, the precautionary principle is about controlling risks, assessing risks, managing risks, but it's not about excluding all risks ex ante, which in some kinds it is misunderstood. And this is the end of progress, and this is what we need to overcome. If you listen to Mr. Gabriel today, to cite a German social democrat, I mean, he is addressing this with 6 points to say we need to overcome this fear aspect in public perception, and we need to overcome this technology adversity, because otherwise, I mean, there's not many possibilities we have in Europe in a shrinking society than innovation. So we must not stop innovation, but we agree we must assess risks. One sentence on the ISDS, do we listen to each other? And you're right, I mean, the arguments are very often similar, and I think we very much listen to each other, at least I do. And I say we are very much ready to improve the instrument. But do I listen to the argument to say we cannot have any kind of ISDS because this is the end of democracy? No, I don't listen, because this is simply wrong.
We are ending a cycle, and we're starting a new cycle, institutional cycle. So I wonder if all the problems we have encountered are not because you're all basically saying that the Commission has mismanaged one way or the other, the access to documents, the access to also positions. So do you think the new Commissioner will be a better one? And also, it's not just at European level. There are also things happening on the other side of the Atlantic with midterm elections. What do you think what kind of impact is going to have on this discussion? Better or worse?
Well, was the start on the public debate a very good one? I think the answer is a clear no, we all know this. But on the other hand, I think we have to acknowledge, and I think also Monique said it, I mean, this is, on the contrary, this is the most transparent agreement we ever had. I mean, there's a number of consultations. We have this advisory group, which might be improved. I would not even disagree. But we have to acknowledge that we have more than we ever had. And of course, there's also a learning curve. So is the change of institutions a chance to translate these attempts? And you will have seen this procedure which is launched by the ombudsman or the ombudswoman. But I think also there, it is clearly said that a lot of attempts are made and more is done than has ever been done for an agreement. So is this a chance to relaunch it in a way to say, let's demonstrate more what is done and what can we do even better? I would say yes. But this doesn't mean that they haven't done it well before. because I think nobody expected this debate. And of course, once the debate is started, it's very difficult to control. But I think the efforts have been there, and the attempts have been there. And was it realistic to do it on one tank of gas? Well, apparently not. Will the next year be the decisive one? Well, I think so. After the midterm and after the new institutions being fully in place and in power on European level, I think we have a little chance to make progress. And once again, I think we need to seize this opportunity.
And I agree really with what has been said before, and I also would like to stress that Mr. Juncker himself has been quite outspoken about the need for more transparency. So I think the direction is given, and I think that DG Trade officials have really tried very hard, but they didn't have the tools. It was a little bit like there has been no president, what should we do? And then it was a little bit like reacting on the spot to demands. But there was no vision about transparency, so there should be a little bit also for the future trade agreements, so like what's the strategy of transparency, not like on the spot reacting to, we would like a stakeholder meeting, yes, we will have a stakeholder meeting, an advisory group, yes, an advisory group. So that would be, I'm also quite optimistic that there is a fresh start in the way they approach to the negotiations.
Any more questions from any reporters? Yes.
Jarno Hartikainen, Finnish Business Daily Kauppalehti. We've heard that the unions and the consumer groups have their red lines on TTIP, so I would pose my question on Mr. Beyrer. Do you have red lines on TTIP? I mean, I'm thinking of public procurement in the US, for example, which is, you know, one of the main goals of EU is to open up the competition for European companies. If this wouldn't be included in the deal, would you still be able to accept it?
Well, I think this is a little bit too early to say, and I rather talk about ambitions and negotiating positions than about red lines. Because I think, I mean, we have seen what happened in the German trade unions, which I think is a positive approach, which in a way means that they want to have a constructive approach towards TTIP, and they have 14 points. So, well, I mean, if everybody has 14 points, and each of these points is a conditio sine qua non, we might have problems in negotiating. But of course, we have clear ambitions. We want to reduce the tariffs to zero. We are not there. We don't even have the offer we would expect. We want to have services on the basis of a negative list. We are not there. On public procurement, you're very clear. We always said to our friends on the US side, we will need clear progress in public procurement on federal and also on sub-federal level in order to make this a success in Europe. This will be very difficult. But I think there is aspects which can give hope in the Canada agreement. And again, I mean, I'm very surprised about the debate we're having in Europe. I think the US negotiators are much more preoccupied on what might be in the Canada agreement than we should be in Europe. But the very unhelpful debate we're having it in Europe. I don't hear any debate in the US. So sometimes I'm not so sure whether our way of acting in these stories is so smart. But public procurement, I mean, the Jones Act, I mean, you learn a lot in these negotiations, and I learned that this is, I think, from the 20s and has been designed in order to allow the US to build up a decent fleet. Well, you could come to the opinion that this was successful. So, and this now you could do a little differently, and you could also come to the opinion that parts of these fleets are less competitive than they could be because they have been protected. So our approach is, of course, they should be opened up. But do I talk about red lines? No, because I think what we need to see is a negotiation where we have many aspects on the table and where we are able to make also creative solutions, because this is what this agreement is all about. We are talking about negotiation between two blocs, which so far were used to impose the view on the others. And this goes for the US, and this certainly also goes for the European Union. So this time we will have to be creative. So do we have a long list of ambitions? Yes, and it's longer than what I was stating here. But I rather don't talk about red lines, because we will have to judge on the overall package.
What about Buy America provisions? And is this
well, this is something we would like to disappear on both sides of the Atlantic, very clearly.
But that's the federal government, which is negotiating this, is not in a position to order states, no?
Well, this is, of course, a challenge, but this is something where we will expect our friends on the other side of the Atlantic to find a solution, like the Canadians did.
Hi, thank you. Craig Willey, German Press Agency. I thought it was very interesting because the debate isn't as black and white in the sense that we have slightly nuanced commentators. And I was quite intrigued by the point on technical barriers versus societal choices. Has work been done either between you and between all the associations here to determine what are the really legitimate technical barriers to be dismantled and what are issues which are left up to countries to decide how their society is? And second, has there been analysis of what the Commission has presented so far as to whether they're going beyond technical barriers to societal choices? I'm saying this also because we've heard a lot about ISDS, we always hear a lot about ISDS, but we don't hear much about the rest, and it tends to be, well, we don't know yet, but they have presented a few position papers, so I was wondering if I got a comment on that. Thank you.
I think there is no straight line, and there has to be trust. I'm married with an American, and I lived there for quite a while. When I visited my cousin last year, or at the very beginning of this year actually, he asked me a million questions about, is it true that the French cheese is really produced the way it is and that it carries a million of bacteria with it? And if that, and you go into this discussion and you say, where does he get the information? And finally I told him, look, I love it, and it would help your country if you might even lose weight in the Midwest if you use it. But they are really concerned about it. They think our quality standards and our food standards and our health standards are not up to what they need. And I can say for both sides, I mean, there is no, if we don't trust America and America doesn't trust Europe and we give it a little freedom, we will never examine where the line is and what could be bad or good. We have to take the trust that when we accept the other one's rules, that they're pretty high standards. I mean, the people dying in America is rather limited, and in Europe too. So I completely trusted, dropped that subject, and this is so frustrating because if I listen to it as a consumer and as an entrepreneur, I have the feeling, what are they discussing in Brussels? These are not the subjects we have, sorry. I mean, nobody died from French cheese, and nobody died from chlorine chicken, and this is ridiculous. We have to go to the point and say we want that free market, and we want that free market to be a model, and we want to get employment higher than it is right now here in Europe, and we need the Americas for that, and that is all forgotten. Now we talk about the suing American company, and we're talking about the things we have to protect our market for. I'm afraid we get lost in it. We can make free trade agreements with all the other countries, which are so far away in standards and whatever from us. And now there comes the one who is the most similar, and we fall over our feet because here is an endless discussion about things which are absolutely, sorry, worthless to be discussed.
I've got a question in the absence of that, which relates to something that Bernadette mentioned earlier, which is a kind of a narrow agreement, one that sort of basically is achievable, one that you can kind of get hold of now and get the good bits out of, and then the possibility of kind of a longer term kind of negotiation to kind of add more bits on. I mean, is this a possibility in this case? Is this, practical? Is it an outcome that you think would be desirable?
Well, first, we should not fail. Second, I mean, this is a lot about this debate of the low-hanging fruits. So I don't think there's so many low-hanging fruits left, because otherwise, in the relationship we have, we would have done it since a long time. So I believe we need to have an ambitious approach in order to have a number of aspects on the table, in order to be able to come to creative solutions, as I said previously, because this is not just one more agreement. Insofar, I agree with Monique. This is the agreement. I mean, this is the biggest step we can make in bilateral trade and investment, and therefore we'll need to combine all the assets we have at the table to have also big ambition on the scope, And in order to be able to do the creative deals, the innovative deals, we will need to make this agreement an success.
Martin, do you have a view on it?
Yeah, I would say it's Obama put that possibility on the table, and I think we should take it. If we, yes, I can live with, sure, I can live with something less, but I think at the end we should find together that free trade and all what is behind is, so far we look in history, raising the wealth of all people involved. And that is what we have to go back and look at it from a bird perspective. And I say, take as much as you can and hopefully make it successful.
It's a trade and investment agreement with a lot of other aspects, but I don't see the lack of democratic control. I mean, this is negotiated on the basis of the mandate according to the treaties. The mandate has been decided by the member states. Now the Commission is negotiating it. People are kept not enough, as you're saying, but all the constituencies are kept more informed than they normally have ever been in any previous agreements. And at the end, I mean, the Parliament will have to vote it, and the Council will have to decide. And very probably, I mean, we'll see up to the extent also the national governments, so national parliament. So I don't see the lack of democracy.
Well, this is Elizabeth from the European Consumer Organization. I just wanted to ask the business representatives whether they see a need for more transparency in the TTIP negotiations or not, and why. Thank you.
Do I start or you start?
You know, I get what I get from the newspaper, and what our concerns are regarding from the association being involved. We do not have, talking for the engineering association, we do not have the feeling that we are not enough involved. We do have the feeling that the American side has a very tough hard time to define who is our correspondent partner in negotiation, the details for what our interests are. Do we belong to the automotive? No, we don't. Do we belong to general industry? No, we don't. We are machine tool sector. So where do they put us? They don't have something similar in their organization world there. So it's a little bit difficult for us. But I think it's up to the Brussels community to decide if they feel uninformed or not. And obviously, there are some concerns that these things are not opened up enough. I get the feeling it is a relatively, I've never seen and never heard that any trade negotiation was discussed in the public as much as this one is. And I'm surprised that especially here, everybody has the feeling we are not informed. As I open the newspaper, and there's actually every day something in it. If I look at the Korean agreement, which might be much more scary when I look at Korea and the automotive sector there, nobody talked about it. I mean, really nobody. So I'm not really sure if my perspective might be wrong, but I think to be honest, and that might not really fit in this round, I have a lot of feeling there is, and it came across, especially when we had this NSA thing. It then fell down after we found out that we spy as much on them than they do on us. But as long as that came up, you had the feeling, I mean, this TTIP thing is the worst thing which can happen to us, you know, and I had the feeling it has a lot to do with we are very skeptical about our partner overseas. And I think all this skepticism is put into this agreement. And I think we have to step back a little bit and say this is not the political discussion about Guantanamo, and it's not about Syria, and I don't know what. It's a free trade agreement or a trade agreement and an investment agreement. And if we can put it down to this and really look at with less emotion to it, I feel, I mean, we as our branch feel well informed. But I learned here, and I can share that the ones who are involved in the process don't get the papers, then obviously there's something wrong here. And that should be that should be healed, and I don't think it's too difficult to heal. Let me say this, somebody said, when you play poker, you don't put your cards on the table. Yes, and I think the parliament has to play a little poker. If we in a negotiation phase where we are with the Americans, where we want them to open much more, partially from their point of view, much more than we open to them, to say we put that all on the table openly because we discussed it in widespread, I don't think that works. I think there will be negotiations behind closed doors, and otherwise you will never get a reasonable agreement done. Or at least you don't get the other side to move into your direction if you show all your cards up front. That's my opinion, and therefore I think there will be always a part which is not published in the newspaper, hopefully, because that will be the part which brings us further.
Markus?
So, well, as we have both been addressed very briefly, I mean, number one, could the start have been better for many reasons? I think the answer is a clear yes. Number two, and I think we were agreeing on this podium, this is the agreement with the most efforts made on transparency ever, so I think we could acknowledge this. Is there room for improvement? Yes. But can everything be made public all the time? The answer is a clear no, because all negotiations need to involve a certain level of secrecy. This is relevant for all negotiations. And this is also relevant for negotiations in private. If you want to sell your car and you're ready to sell it within a margin of 15,000 to 20,000 euros, and if the persons you talk to know it, I mean, then you're pretty sure that you will not get more than 15,000 and not closest to 20 what you would normally like to. So maybe this is a little too simplistic, but so is there margin for improvement? And I think, and Monique said it, the new president of the Commission was underlining this, but will there remain a certain and necessary level of secrecy? Of course. Because this is what negotiations are very often also about, because otherwise you don't come to a decent result.
Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to everyone who came. There are drinks over there. You're probably dying for one by now. Yeah, thank you all and good night.
Thank you, Stephen.